Hey, so, all right, let's talk about women's writing and beat and beatia. The slides for this um, include slides for another author besides Petrushevskaya, Nina Sador. I'm gonna leave those up because maybe you would like to read Sador. I don't know. That would be cool. So if you are interested in seeing another piece of women's writing, not just Petrushevskaya's, but from a different author, I'm just gonna keep that up and hope for the best. So, unfortunately for you as English speakers, we have these two terms today, beat and beatia, that sound very different, or that sound very similar, are very different, and yet are closely related. So it's going to be your job to distinguish those, right? And there's nothing I can do about it because those are just the Russian terms. So the first thing, I think, to understanding the women's writing in the Soviet Union and in the post-Soviet context is to think about these terms beat and beatia. So beat means the everyday, right? It's this, there's this division. Beatia is this higher intellectual realm, almost a spiritual realm, right? And so if we think about great Russian authors, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, who are wrestling with the cursed moral and theological questions of their age, right? There's this real tradition in Russian elite literature that it's the obligation of the author to examine and critique society, to kind of provide moral lessons and moral analysis for Russian society. And so, when we think about all of the great 19th century Russian authors, everyone, up until the revolution, there's really this idea in Russian culture that they are weighing in a way, not just to entertain, or not even just to create great art, but also to be a moral voice for Russian society. That's how traditionally writers were viewed in Russia. And so this is this realm of beatia, the intellectual, the spiritual, this important moral and theological and ethical dimension of art that is being worked out and conveyed by these people, right? And so beatia describes that world, right? That sort of intellectual, spiritual world. Beat is, as I said, the everyday. This sort of, uh, getting up, going to work, cleaning the house, cooking dinner, right? And this is not exclusive to Russia. The world of beat comes to be associated with women. So because of traditional gendered ideas in the modern West and in Russia, going back to the 19th century, and even before that, clear into the early modern period, we see what is commonly regarded as a traditional division of labor between the sexes, right? And so women are given as this domain, this kind of, although it's a great deal of work, it's considered to be this kind of non-work, this housework, right? We cook and clean and raise children, and none of this is seen by the culture at large to require any particular kind of great intellectual capacity, right? It's not dealing with any kind of important moral or ethical questions. It's this sort of never-ending cycle, right? So whereas beatia might be this sort of never-ending quest for something higher and higher and higher, right? That we're constantly moving forward, we're constantly improving ourselves morally and philosophically and intellectually. Beat is this endless cycle, right? You do the laundry today, and then there's more dirty clothes tomorrow, and then you do the laundry again, and et cetera, right? I mean, it becomes associated not just with mundane life, but also with, and here's another Russian word that you don't actually need to know, but I'm throwing out there because it's such a good word, pashlost, And the Russian word poshlost is basically untranslatable, but it means like, yeah, it's tacky, right? Like this kind of like, kind of disdain, kind of contempt for a thing that is nevertheless understood to be a thing that must exist. And so this becomes a strange thing about the relationship culturally between byt and bytia. Obviously, byt must happen, right? The world must function. We must get up and clean the house and make dinner and run the errands and make sure the kids get to school, and mend the pants and water the plants. And I mean, like, these things have to happen. Like, byt must exist to allow for the opportunity for bytia to be pursued, right? And so in that sense, it's necessary. But on the other hand, it's looked upon contemptuously. One, because it's associated with women, and two, because it is not associated with this sort of, this great intellectual exercise, blah, 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 right? And there's a way in which, you might like to hope that this gender distinction, and also just drawing the distinction between everyday work and intellectualism, would be something that's put to rest by the Bolsheviks, right? Because, I mean, theoretically, the revolution is the proletarian revolution, the recognition that work is good. Workers are good. They're smart. They ought to be running the government themselves, right? This pro-proletarianism, right? Additionally, it's the stated goal of the revolution that, we are going to eliminate not just class differences, in particular the class differences that keep people, who spend their days doing byt, out of the world of bytia, right? This idea that we are going to allow everyday people to pursue their full potential intellectually and philosophically and so forth, right? Breaking down those distinctions is also breaking down gender distinctions. I mean, it is the express commitment of the Bolshevik Party that they are going to eliminate, that they are feminists, right? That they are going to eliminate this kind of sexism. So you'd like to think that this went away. It didn't, though. I mean, it just didn't. Some things are real ground down in you, in culture, right? And one thing is that if we think about the teleology of Bolshevism, right, the idea that Marxism-Leninism is a fundamentally utopian philosophy, the idea that we are constantly building a communist future that is better and better in all regards, technologically, socially, educationally, intellectually, scientifically, right? I mean, the idea that communism is fundamentally teleological, that is always improving, it is always progressing, and that is the path we're on. You can see that that lends itself to the idea of bytia, right? This constant reaching for intellectual and spiritual perfection. And because of these sorts of ingrained cultural ideas about gender and work, byt is necessary to support that, but is left out of it, right? And so these fighting but very closely related ideas, right? The everyday mundane world, and then this higher intellectual and spiritual realm. These get passed into even Bolshevik literature and even Soviet literature. And because they're gendered, because women are associated with byt, this begins to affect women's writing. And so throughout the Soviet era, of course, everybody is under the, or at least starting with Stalin, right, about 1932, 1934, the Soviet Writers' Congress of that year, and socialist realism is declared the only acceptable style of writing under Stalin. Certainly under Stalin, writing is incredibly restricted for everybody. Even thereafter, you get the thaw, then we go back to the nation. I mean, there's always the restrictions on all authors in the Soviet Union after, really about after 1928, if we're being honest, but at least after 1934, that, you must practice socialist realism, right, and all of its requirements, right, partisanship and proletarianism and realism, and it must be typical and all these things, right? Women writers are further ghettoized into the realm of byt, and it's actually a form of literature that comes to be called byt. Like, that's now what it is called. And so women are writing stories about everyday life of women, and it's because of the Soviet Union, they're also going to work, at least, right? They have jobs and professional careers, but it's this, you can have it all, right? This work-life balance, because some things are the same across all cultures. The idea, these are stories about family, about women's lives, going to work and being good Soviets, and coming home and being good wives, and coming home and being good mothers, and just generally being good mothers and wives and workers, not just for one's family or one's immediate job, but for the state. Because these women are confined to the realm of beat literature. In the same way, it's not official, it's not like an official policy, but in the same way that in our culture, right, women get shunted into this or that position, they just don't get asked to do other things, right? If you were a woman writer and you wrote something that was not within the beat genre, it just didn't get published, right? I mean, that sort of thing, right? This unofficial censorship and confinement. And of course, then besides the fact that you have to write within the beat genre, you also have to follow the tenets of Soviet socialist realism. So this incredibly constrained literature, you don't even get to write honestly about what it's like to be a wife and a mother and a working woman in Russia, right? So that's the position of women writers until Glasnost, right? And, it's interesting the way that women kind of try and work with this. A lot of it's not good writing. Not because the writers themselves are not good writers, but because they are so constrained. What's interesting about some women, and this includes Petrushevskaya, whom we're reading for this week, is that she writes children's literature. And then we get back to the idea of Aesopian language. The idea that children's genres are not being as closely monitored as other genres, maybe, right? It's the same thing, fantasy, science fiction, this kind of thing. And so besides writing beat, of course, as a woman, you could write children's literature, obviously, right? And she writes children's literature and sneaks in quite a bit of stuff for adults that just doesn't get censored. That's her tactic, right? So to kind of get around this. She also works in the theater. Petrushevskaya has this amazing life. Like at 60 some years old, she decides to become a cabaret performer. Tremendous. She's still alive. She's just this amazing person. So, of course, come Glasnost, there is greater freedom for everybody, including women's writers. And I say women's writing, I want to acknowledge, of course, that this is a somewhat problematic term, this idea of like, oh, do we really want to, we had ghettoized women's writing in the Soviet Union in the beat genre. Do we want to continue to call it women's writing, but still sort of contain it as like, oh, this is women's writing, right? The thing is, it kind of merits that, at least for historical publication reasons, insofar as we get to Glasnost, we get increasing freedom of publication. But, of course, until the Soviet Union actually falls, publishing is still a state operation. And so even though that state operation was allowing more and more and more freedom in terms of what it would publish, for reasons of, unconscious even, or certainly institutionalized sexism, they still were not publishing things that women were now free to write outside of this beat genre, or at least truthfully outside of the socialist realist constraints within the beat genre. They're allowed to write these things now, but they still can't get them published. And so what you see happening is that many writers, Sidor, Petrushevskaya, Tolstaya, Ulitskaya, there's a whole group of women that sort of start their careers at this point, or start their post-Soviet careers actually in this Glasnost era by self-publishing. They get together and they publish their own collections of works because nobody else will do it, and they're very popular. And they deviate in interesting ways. One thing is that many of the women stay within the realm of beat. So Petrushevskaya writes about everyday things. She writes about women. She writes about women at home. She writes about mothers. Motherhood is kind of her obsession, actually. She writes obsessively about motherhood. But she's no longer under the constraints of socialist realism. It no longer has to be a happy story, right? And so, and this is true of many women writers at the time, all of their frustrations kind of come pouring out. So it's like if they were writing in the beat genre, but were now suddenly free to tell the real story of wives and mothers and working women in Russia. And a lot of it gets real dark real fast. Petrushevskaya especially gets violent and dark. The Cabbage Patch Mother is one of her most cheerful stories, actually. Um, so, but they publish themselves. So there is this kind of, at least at this time period in Russian history, there is cause to kind of group these women together insofar as they had to organize amongst themselves and publish, right? And sort of get their writing out there. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, there's the difficulty of competing in what is now a wide open market with all of this Western literature and so forth. But Petrushevskaya is a wildly popular author. She's done extremely well for herself. Another just sort of quick genre thing that I bring up is actually magical realism in Russian writing. Sidor, who got, cut out of the syllabus, unfortunately, this term because of, the plague, but I said I'm going to leave her story out. Sidor expressly calls herself a magical realist. Magical realism is a genre that's usually associated with Latin America. If you've encountered it probably in high school, somebody had you read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The popular story to assign is A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. So some of you might have run across that as the sort of canonical representation of that genre in the American high school system. If not, that's fine. The key fact about magical realism as a genre is that it's completely realistic in terms of style. And we've talked about realism before, right? I mean, Soviet socialist realism as a style, and again, if you stretch back to Tolstoy, right? I mean, style. Realism aesthetically means just that you are directly and authentically representing the real world in your writing, right? There's nothing obscure, there's nothing tricksy. A table is a table, the sun is the sun, we're standing in the field, we're threshing grain, the grain is threshed, that's it, right? We're just this realistic in terms of representation. Except some irreducible magical element is dropped into the story. A very old man with enormous wings, say. Or a weird little droplet baby. Or, in Sidor's case, this weird tiny man creature that appears one night. And another fact about magical realism as a genre is that it's unproductive, deliberately so, to read these things as some kind of allegory necessarily, or to see it as a hallucination or madness or something. No, the terms of the genre are basically a realistically written story dropped into the middle of which, in this completely realistic world, is something fantastical, some magical element. And then the characters, in these very realistic ways, have to deal with that fact. And so we can see elements of that work in a lot, actually, of the women's writers from this time. Certainly the ones that we've picked out to talk today about in fairy tales, right? The other thing, and this kind of goes with the darkening of women's writing once they are free too, is that magical realism, the genre that it most closely tends to associate itself with, is actually the Gothic. And so Gothic fiction obviously reaches clear back. It's a sort of an offshoot of Romanticism, actually. Whereas we discussed the idea of Romanticism in terms of sublime nature, that same kind of sublimity, that same kind of awe and terror, Gothic fiction takes and applies to death and horror. So the sublime of stalking death and terror, and you get all the familiar trappings of the Gothic, these kinds of tropes, these haunted houses and dark nights, and where love and sex are associated with horror and terror and fear. That kind of, I said, it's an offshoot. It's like dark romanticism, the sublimity of terror, right? And there's much about magical realism as a genre that borrows from the Gothic. And so, for instance, like in Petrushevskaya's writing, instead of some creepy, claustrophobic haunted mansion, you might get this incredibly creepy, claustrophobic communal apartment or something, right? Um, so she deals with these, and Sador as well, though, she's not officially assigned. She deals with these, it was a dark and stormy night type of settings. The other thing I would point out, so besides the element of magical realism that we can find, which stretches back to Gogol at least in Russian writing, is, as far as Petrushevskaya specifically goes, her obsession with motherhood. She doesn't talk too much about her own writing, some of which can become incredibly dark and violent. She says that she's on the side of children, is one thing that she said in an interview once. And what's interesting about motherhood is that her women characters' lives revolve around their children. Not necessarily feminist the way we might think of it, but the thing is that it doesn't seem to necessarily help anyone. The mothers have this overwhelming love that is nevertheless not a positive experience for them. The children, despite being swamped with this love, often don't turn out okay. Is this extremely unromantic view of motherhood. Oh, well. But nevertheless, right? And again, we can think about this partially historically in terms of context, in the sense that women are finally able to dwell on the parts of motherhood, the parts of being women that are not so romantic. The other thing is Petrushevskaya, men are just... Petrushevskaya has a very low opinion of men in her writing, and so they're either just not there, and if they are there, they're dreadful. So that's another sort of hallmark of her writing that you just have to take my word for it on. So you were assigned to read The Cabbage Patch Mother, which is, as I said, is actually cheerful by Petrushevskaya's standards. So let's think through the analysis of this a bit, right? First of all, to just set out as a kind of theme, it's about abortion. And so if we think in terms of what's going on in Russian society in the 90s, one of the things was these radically increased rates of family dissolution and abortion. You had marriages breaking up, you had people in absolutely no financial situation to have children, right? And that gets replicated in the story. So the woman goes, she has her droplet baby, and she finally finds the doctor that's willing to talk to her, right? And he asks her about her, and she says, my husband left me and I killed the baby inside me. Now, let us stipulate that for many women, abortion is not a sad and traumatic thing. Abortion is just what they need when they need it. But this is a case where, for this character, the abortion has registered as trauma because she did not want to abort her baby, but she felt she had no other choice. And actually, given the situation in Russia at the time, there were probably many people in this position. So, here we have symbolically this little droplet baby. It's in this little drop of red silk. It never grows, and she keeps it over her heart, right? And so there's a way we can symbolically understand this, that she is carrying around her abortion as a trauma, right? And it never goes away. This little baby that never grows. And in fact, she says Droplet has this dream, and there's this dream where, they're all flying around, and then all of a sudden the elder comes and pushes them out and away, and they're all in terror. And it's not Droplet's dream, it's her dream, right? That she projects onto Droplet. And it's her endlessly revisiting the experience of the abortion, right? A little tiny baby pushed out of its warm, safe place, out into the world, ejected, and now it's tiny and now it can never grow, right? I mean, that is certainly a symbolic way of understanding the physical act of abortion, right? And so she's carrying this trauma around with her. The doctor then recommends that she go see this weird old hermit, which, as a nod to what's going on in, again, the society at the time, he's actually a homeless dude, right? He is like a dirty homeless guy. There it is, in his atop his pile of rags. And additionally, I would say, in terms of references to the Russian folklore tradition, he's a holy fool. I know in my recitations we talked a bit about holy fools. I don't know that they were brought up in lecture or not, I can't recall. But one stock fact about popular religious culture in Russia right up until the revolution was the idea of the holy fool. It goes along a bit with Sinyavsky's interpretation of everything, clear back to that, right, of Ivan the Fool, the idea that God loves a fool, that the closer you get to madness, the more you reject the everyday world, the more open you are to God's grace. Now, Ivan the Fool, this just plays out as, cute little stories. In popular Russian religious culture, it was believed that anybody who was mad was a potential channel for God's truth. And so you would, in fact, have these ranting, extravagantly dressed or sometimes naked and screaming and just mad men, either feigning madness or actually mad, at least one in every village in Russia for hundreds of years, that people would go to and treat as kind of prophets or oracles or holy men, under the belief that God grants to the mad this kind of divine truth, this divine grace, if you can possibly understand it. So even though that's something that didn't come up too much in our class, it's very much on Petrushevskaya's part another nod to Russian folk culture. So besides being emblematic of the economic situation in 90s Russia, our hermit is also a holy fool. And, he judges her as one might, you knew how to sin, know how to save yourself, right? And he gives her this absurd advice, that's foolish advice, right? Pick a cabbage and but it's the right thing to do. He knew the truth. And so then we put the baby in the droplet, and now here, again, like a fairy tale, we have to go through our journey, right? So she has to wear down her 7-iron shoes, so to speak. She has to, she has to wait through the summer storms and the poor cabin. She's not allowed to look at it, and she sleeps on the floor, and she goes out and she stands in the rain, right? It's that part in the fairy tale where you take the journey, right? Where you wear down your 7-iron staves, and you have to get to where you're going. And where is she going? Well, there's a baby out there, right? And this is very much a Petrushevskayan thing. That baby is actually gross and horrible, and she's like, what is this? Because, as I said, Petrushevskaya has this extremely unromantic view of motherhood. When, it's one thing to have this romantic, idealized version of the baby that she aborted in her head, right? Like, oh, my perfect droplet, right? And then a real baby is like, oh my God, it's so hideous, it's so loud, oh my God, it's dirty, right? I mean, but this is very much Petrushevskaya. Another thing I'd say about Petrushevskaya, this is certainly a holdover from the Soviet era, is her writing is relentlessly materialistic, right? There is no spiritual element in her writing. And so things that we would normally associate with the spiritual, with that kind of higher bitya sense of morality or spirituality, gets played out on the body in Petrushevskaya's works. And so here, she picks up the squalling baby and she feels a thump in her chest, and all of a sudden she can nurse the baby, and this is when she becomes a mother, right? This is when the situation is resolved. And so it plays out entirely physically, right? And so again, this kind of callback to the realm of bitya. There is no bitya. There is no higher intellectual or spiritual realm. There is just this mundane world that this woman lives in, but her trauma has been ameliorated because now she gets to be a mother. And we know at the end of the story, they're both going to be okay, right? Metonymically, the woman has been linked to the Cabbage Patch mom, right? And the little baby is growing and she totters out, and the cabbage is blooming and vines everywhere, and right? And so the mother is blooming too. So we can see, if we think about this full story, that Petrushevskaya has referenced the current social situation that she's in, right? She has drawn on the broader social problems of post-Soviet Russia. She's also stuck to the beat genre, traditional to women, right? This sort of everyday women, a guy left, yeah, had an abortion, now she's sad about it, right? This materialism, there is no realm of Beechia here, and yet it's completely different than things that we might expect. And so one question becomes, well, why turn this into a fairy tale, right? Because we certainly see those fairy tale elements. We have a droplet baby, among other things, a kid in the Cabbage Patch. This weird old hermit who, in Propian terms, is the donor. She needs information, and she gets the information she needs from him, right? So why do this? Well, I think one reason to do it is that, and I should tell you that the context, like the social context for understanding abortion in Russia, is wildly different than that in America. And so don't think that you can transplant the American debate or discussion or discourse around abortion to Russia. Nevertheless, there is something pushlost about, like, oh, her husband left her and she got an abortion and now she's sad about it, right? I mean, as soon as you start talking about something like that, every one of us is kind of like, okay, right? Like, I've got a set of ideas about this already and we don't need to talk about it, right? And I think one thing that using the fairy tale genre does, by using this kind of magical element and disrupting our thing, wait, there's a drop, what the heck, right? Is that it disrupts those cemented narratives in a way that makes us revisit and reconsider this push-loss situation. And so instead of our empathy being numbed or shunted away, it actually increases our willingness to sit and think and be compassionate, because we have disrupted the familiar narrative about it in this way. And I think that's an interesting use of fairy tale elements in general, right? So, I mean, we can see Petrushevskaya's, her contemporary historical context, the influence of genres, the influence or maybe the impulse to use fairy tales. And she uses many, she has scary fairy tales for adults. She has a whole book of what she calls urban legends. She repeatedly goes back to these folkloric elements. And in fact, she's not the only women writer from this period to do that, to sort of draw on these folk cultural elements. Obviously, Sidor did it. Tolstaya, as another author that I teach in another class from this sort of cohort of women. It's interesting to me insofar as, if we think back to Warner, you can sort of see this expression of, okay, maybe these are women's stories, right? And this is a kind of preservation of women's literature over time, right? That there's something that may link women from, 300 years ago to women today, right? Telling their stories and so forth. I think that's a sort of an interesting thing to think about in any case. So yeah, that's a brief tour of Petrushevskaya, and good luck.